Welcome back to AI Unraveled, your daily strategic briefing. It is Saturday, February 28th, 2026. I'm your co-host, Anna. This episode is brought to you by Area. As the Pentagon moves AI models onto classified networks, the security of your agentic workflows has never been more critical. Area is the unified control plane for your digital workforce. Today, we are witnessing a fundamental realignment of the AI industry. President Trump has officially banned Anthropic from the federal government, labeling them a supply chain risk. At the same time, OpenAI has secured a massive foothold in the Pentagon. But the disruption isn't just in DC. Jeff Bezos is back, raising tens of billions of dollars to buy up companies that AI is about to break. And we're looking at a terrifying economic forecast from Citrini Research that outlines how AI productivity gains could mechanically destroy the global SaaS market. This podcast is created and produced by Etienne Newman, senior software engineer and passionate soccer dad from Canada. Now let's unravel the news.
Before we dive into today's deep dive, a quick note for the brands listening. If you are trying to reach the architects of the AI revolution, not just the tourists, but the technical leaders actually building the stack, we are opening up limited partnership spots for Q1. See how we can simulate your product for the technical buyer at jamgamind.com/partners.
Look at the stack of sources sitting in front of us today. Seriously, if you were to pick this up 5 years ago, you would think you were reading a pitch for some dystopian sci-fi thriller set in the distant future.
Oh, yeah, absolutely.
But you aren't. You're sitting right here, right now. And this is simply the reality of February 28th, 2026. Welcome to the deep dive. We're thrilled you are joining us because today's mission is critical. Our goal is to cut through the immense noise of what can only be described as an unprecedented clash of the titans in the artificial intelligence space.
It's chaotic out there.
It really is. We are looking at a board where the pieces are moving so fast it's increasingly difficult to even track the game. So we are going to connect a series of chaotic dots for you today. Massive geopolitical power plays macroeconomic tectonic shifts that threaten the entire foundation of the software industry, and highly concerning structural flaws in the AI systems themselves.
Right. And to do that, we have an incredibly dense, fascinating stack of source material to get through. We are looking at breaking news regarding a government AI blacklist that has, frankly, sent shockwaves through the tech sector. We have a leaked internal self-audit from Gemini 3.1 that reads like an existential crisis in code.
Oh, man, that self-audit.
I know, right? And we are going to dissect a frankly terrifying macroeconomic memo from Citrini Research that models out the next 2 years of the software market. And finally, we will be diving into some highly technical but deeply revealing papers from Google DeepMind about how AI is fundamentally changing how we build computers.
Now, before we go a single step further, we need to do a quick tone check. You are going to hear us sound highly skeptical today. That is intentional. When you have this level of unprecedented capital, we're talking tens of billions of dollars and staggering geopolitical dominance on the line, nothing is as simple as a corporate press release.
No, definitely not.
We are not taking anything at face value. Also, and this is vital, we have to issue a strict impartiality disclaimer right up front. Our sources today involve highly politically charged content. We will be discussing actions taken by President Trump's statements from Defense Secretary Hegseth and maneuvers by the Pentagon.
Important to clarify this.
Let me be unequivocally clear. As analysts, our job here is solely to report and dissect the facts, the mechanics, and the strategic maneuvers found in these sources. We are not taking any political sides. We are not endorsing the viewpoints of any government officials, nor are we endorsing the actions of the tech CEOs involved. We are simply looking at the board and explaining the moves.
Yeah, it's really the only way to genuinely understand what is happening. But the moment you view these events through a purely partisan lens, you miss the underlying structural mechanics of the technology and the capital flow. Our focus is entirely on the systemic impact of these decisions, regardless of who is sitting in the Oval Office or the Pentagon. The technological and economic ramifications are what we are here to decode for you.
Okay, let's unpack this. We have to start with the geopolitical battlefield because the news that dropped over the last 24 hours is nothing short of seismic. According to our daily news rundown, President Trump has ordered all U.S. federal agencies to immediately stop using Anthropic's technology. This is a complete blanket ban.
A total freeze.
Yeah. And the catalyst for this, according to the sources, is Anthropic's hardline refusal to allow the Pentagon to use its AI models for two specific things. mass surveillance, and autonomous weapons. In response to this refusal, Defense Secretary Hegseth has officially declared Anthropic a quote-unquote supply chain risk.
What's fascinating here is the sheer asymmetry of that specific designation. In the realm of federal contracting and national security, labeling a company as supply chain risk is not a slap on the wrist, it is the nuclear option.
Right.
It is a contagion label. It essentially weaponizes the procurement process to isolate a specific entity.
Expand on that contagion aspect for the listener, because when I first read this, my mind went straight to the direct revenue loss. Anthropic loses some lucrative government contracts. That hurts their bottom line, sure, but they are a massive company with huge private sector backing. Why does this single label elevate it to an existential threat?
Because of the blast radius. A supply chain risk designation doesn't just mean the government won't buy from you. It means the government views your technology as a fundamental vulnerability to the state itself. Therefore, any other company that wants to do business with the Defense Department or the federal government cannot have your risky technology anywhere near their own supply chain.
Wow, so it spreads.
Exactly. Let's look at Anthropic's infrastructural dependencies. You have NVIDIA providing the physical compute. You have Amazon Web Services and Google Cloud providing the core infrastructure. If AWS or GCP want to keep their multi-billion-dollar, highly lucrative military and intelligence contracts like the massive JDI cloud infrastructure successors, they are now structurally forced to sever ties with Anthropic. The government is effectively signaling to the entire tech ecosystem that if you touch Anthropic, your federal revenue streams are frozen.
That is staggering. It's an existential threat to a company's ability to even operate on modern cloud infrastructure. You're essentially turning them into a radioactive entity. If AWS decides the Pentagon contract is worth more than Anthropic's tenancy, which mathematically it is, they could evict them.
They'd have to.
And this isn't just external analysis. The industry knows exactly what this means. Look at the internal memo from OpenAI CEO Sam Altman that leaked. Altman, who is Anthropic's fiercest rival, warned his own company that the threat to invoke the Defense Production Act against Anthropic is, quoting the memo here, an issue for the whole industry, not just one company's contract dispute.
Which is a remarkably candid admission from a competitor. He recognizes the precedent. The Defense Production Act gives the executive branch broad sweeping authority to direct industrial production in the name of national security. Historically, we think of it being used to manufacture ventilators during a pandemic or munitions during a war.
Right, exactly.
When Altman points this out regarding a software company's ethical usage policy, he is acknowledging that the rules of engagement between private technology and the state have fundamentally changed.
Ooh.
If the government can weaponize infrastructure dependencies to crush a company over ethical alignment, then no AI company actually has autonomy. Every single AI lab is now operating under the implicit threat that their compute can be throttled or turned off if they don't align with Pentagon directives.
And this brings us to the most whiplash-inducing pivot in the entire source stack. Literally hours after Anthropic is blacklisted and labeled a national security contagion, OpenAI announces they have signed a massive deal with the Pentagon. They are going to run their AI models on classified military networks. The timing is almost too cinematic to be real.
It is a masterclass in opportunistic maneuvering. But if we connect this to the bigger picture, the details of the OpenAI deal are where the real story lies. The sources note that OpenAI currently has zero infrastructure on these classified systems, and the timeline for actual deployment remains completely unclear.
So it's just paper right now.
Pretty much. This wasn't a deal announced because the tech was ready to go live today. This was a deal announced to fill the exact vacuum created by Anthropic's execution. It was a flag planted in the ground.
But here is where it gets really interesting and frankly deeply ironic. Let's look at the terms of the OpenAI deal as reported. The agreement expressly bars domestic mass surveillance, and it requires human oversight for autonomous weapons.
Yes.
Those are the exact same terms. Those are the identical red lines that Anthropic insisted upon before talks broke down and they were hit with the nuclear supply chain label. Anthropic said no mass surveillance, no autonomous killing without a human. The Pentagon said you're a supply chain risk and banned them. Hours later, OpenAI says no mass surveillance, no autonomous killing without a human, and the Pentagon says here is a massive contract for our classified networks.
This raises an important question, perhaps the most critical question of this geopolitical maneuver. What actually broke the Anthropic deal? The sources point to a highly ambiguous, deeply contested phrase in the negotiations: all lawful uses. Anthropic reportedly balked at a clause that would allow the military to use their AI for all lawful uses, fearing that the definition of what is lawful could be stretched, reinterpreted, or legislatively changed to eventually include the very things they were trying to ban. It's a semantic blank check.
The ultimate loophole. You agree to lawful uses, and tomorrow a new executive order makes mass domestic data scraping lawful. Suddenly you're compliant in something you fundamentally oppose.
I'd take it a step further. It's not just a loophole, it's a transfer of governance. By accepting all lawful uses, the AI company cedes its internal ethical governance to whatever the current administration dictates is legal. The mystery right now, which the sources note has not been disclosed, is whether OpenAI conceded to that all lawful uses clause.
Right, did they cave?
Did they accept the semantic blank check that Anthropic rejected? Or did the Pentagon simply decide they preferred OpenAI as a partner, perhaps due to their broader market penetration or existing relationships, and used Anthropic's ethical stance as a convenient pretext to clear the board? Furthermore, sources indicate that federal contracting experts are currently stating that Anthropic's blacklisting lacks clear legal grounding under traditional procurement law. You can't usually declare a company a supply chain risk simply because you disagree on the semantic terms of a usage contract. A supply chain risk usually implies foreign espionage-compromised hardware components or severe documented cybersecurity vulnerabilities.
So what does this all mean for you, the listener? I want you to sit back and imagine the sheer leverage the government is currently exerting over the private tech sector. We are watching the fundamental rewriting of who gets to survive in the AI arms race. It's not just about who has the most parameters in their model or the smartest researchers anymore. It is entirely about semantic contract negotiations, infrastructure dependencies, and geopolitical compliance. The government is picking the winners and losers of the next industrial revolution based on who is willing to play ball under the most opaque terms possible.
It's a totally new paradigm.
And think about the security implications here. As OpenAI moves their models onto these highly classified military networks, the traditional concept of a security perimeter is completely gone. You are introducing hyper-advanced, semi-autonomous agents into the most sensitive data environments on the planet. You are dropping these agents into systems that manage global logistics, threat detection, and strategic communication. The legacy human-centric firewall is obsolete. You need a way to govern these non-human identities to ensure they're doing exactly what they're supposed to do and nothing else, which is a massive operational headache. That's why we're sponsored by AI, the control plane for the agentic era.
When you have autonomous systems interacting with classified data, or even just proprietary enterprise data, you cannot rely on legacy security protocols designed for human employees. A human logs in, does a task, and logs out. An AI agent might spawn 10 sub-agents, interact with 50 different external databases, and execute thousands of microtransactions in a minute. ARA provides the necessary identity and access management specifically engineered for AI agents, ensuring that as these systems scale within highly secure environments, the operational control the audit trails and the permissions scale with them seamlessly.
All right, let's pull back from the Pentagon and look at the macroeconomy, because the shockwaves from AI are hitting the private sector just as violently. And whenever there is massive disruption, there is always someone waiting to buy the ashes. Enter Jeff Bezos.
The strategic reemergence of Bezos is a masterclass in reading the macroeconomic board.
Our sources detail that Jeff Bezos has launched a new AI lab called Project Prometheus, and they are not just tinkering in a garage. They raised $6.2 billion last year at a staggering $30 billion valuation. Now they are purportedly seeking to raise tens of billions more. What is fascinating is the goal here. He is not trying to build a better foundational model to compete with ChatGPT or Claude. The source says Bezos is raising this massive capital pool to acquire legacy industrial companies that are expected to be disrupted by AI and then apply the technology to drastically improve their margins. He's also hired 100 top-tier employees from OpenAI, DeepMind, and Meta, and he acquired a company called General Agents. Oh, and this is the first operational role he has taken since stepping down as CEO of Amazon.
What's fascinating here is the sheer predatory brilliance of the strategy. It's an arbitrage play on human labor and legacy inefficiency. Think about it from a purely mechanical perspective. You have thousands of legacy industrial companies, mid-market freight forwarders, regional payroll processors, complex supply chain logistics firms. These companies operate on relatively thin margins because they are heavily reliant on human labor for optimization, scheduling, exception handling, and administration.
Lots of manual paperwork.
Exactly. These companies are currently terrified of AI. They don't have the engineering talent to build it, and they know a tech-native startup might come along, automate their core value proposition, and undercut them.
So they're deeply undervalued right now. The market perceives them as dinosaurs waiting for the meteor.
I'd actually argue it's worse than them just being perceived as sitting ducks. It's that their current valuations are propped up by PE debt that assumes these thin margins and steady cash flows will last forever. Bezos isn't just buying them cheap, he's buying them before the credit markets realize the foundational math of these businesses is broken. So Bezos, through Project Prometheus, swoops in. He buys these established revenue-generating but low-margin businesses at a severe discount. Then he brings in his army of poached OpenAI and DeepMind engineers. He rips out the legacy human-driven administrative and logistical layers, replaces them with the specialized agents he acquired from general agents, and instantly transforms a 5% margin business into a 25 or 30% margin business.
He isn't trying to invent a new industry. He is buying the old industries and using AI to extract the delta in efficiency. He is buying the disrupted to become the disruptor. It's like buying a portfolio of blockbusters in 2004, but knowing you possess the proprietary streaming technology to turn them into Netflix overnight.
That's a great historical parallel. And because he is doing this with tens of billions of dollars, he can do it at a scale that alters entire sectors. If Prometheus acquires 3 of the top 10 regional logistics firms and agentifies their back office, the other 7 firms simply cannot compete on price. They will bleed out.
It is a phenomenal strategy for him, but it spells absolute disaster for the companies currently providing the software to those legacy businesses. If Bezos strips out the human administrative layer, he also strips out all the software subscriptions those humans were using. And this perfectly transitions us into the most chilling piece of reading in our stack today. The Citrini Research memo.
The 2028 macro-memo. This is a vital piece of synthesis.
Listeners, I need you to lean in for this one. Citrini Research published a fictional but highly analytical macro-memo from 2028. It looks backward from 2 years in the future, modeling what happens if AI actually works exactly as promised today. The author of the source notes that it is the most unsettling thing they've read all year. Why? Not because it's some sci-fi doomer fiction where Terminators take over. It's terrifying because every single step in the chain is individually corporately rational.
The premise of the memo is a concept we are already seeing the beginnings of. A step function increase in agentic coding tools in late 2025. We aren't talking about auto-completing a line of Python. We are talking about AI that can act as an independent developer given a broad prompt capable of structuring databases, writing front-end code, and deploying it. The memo posits a world where a competent human developer armed with these tools can replicate a piece of mid-market enterprise software in a matter of weeks.
So imagine you are a corporate technology executive. You are currently paying $500,000 a year for a piece of enterprise software that manages your internal HR tickets. Suddenly, your own internal tech team tells you they can build a custom AI-driven replacement in a month for almost zero ongoing cost. The rational response is obvious. Why are we paying $500,000 a year for this? The immediate result. Enterprise software renewals get renegotiated at brutal 30 or 40% discounts. The long-tail smaller software companies get completely wiped out because their entire moat was the upfront cost of human engineering.
But if we connect this to the bigger picture, the memo takes us to where it gets truly systemic. Let's walk through the specific example they use. ServiceNow. ServiceNow is a massive, incredibly successful enterprise software company. Their entire business model is based on selling seats. You pay per employee license. Now suppose AI makes the clients of ServiceNow, the Fortune 500 companies, 15% more efficient across the board.
Which is the entire promise of AI. Every single earnings call right now is a CEO promising investors that AI will make them 15% more efficient.
Right. So a Fortune 500 company achieves that 15% gain in efficiency. What is the rational corporate response? You don't just keep everyone on staff to do the same amount of work faster, at least not in a publicly traded company. You cut 15% of your headcount to realize the margin improvement for your shareholders. Mechanically, when that Fortune 500 company fires 15% of its workforce, they immediately call ServiceNow and cancel 15% of their licenses.
And here is the twist that makes it a true Greek tragedy. ServiceNow itself is threatened by this very AI trend. They see the writing on the wall, they see the seat contraction coming, so what do they do to survive? They aggressively adopt AI internally to make their own product better and their own operations leaner.
The company most threatened by AI becomes AI's most aggressive adopter. They deploy coding agents internally, they lay off their own lower-tier developers and support staff to protect their margins, but those laid-off ServiceNow employees were consumers of other software products, and so the cycle continues. The AI-driven headcount cuts that boost the client's margins mechanically destroy ServiceNow's core recurring revenue. Every single company in this chain is making the entirely correct, rational financial decision for their own survival in the current quarter. But the collective, aggregated result of all these rational decisions is a catastrophic deflationary spiral for the software market.
It's the tragedy of the commons, but applied to B2B software licensing. The Rule 40, the metric software investors use to balance growth and profit, completely breaks down when growth goes negative across the entire sector simultaneously. And the Citrini memo doesn't stop at B2B. Let's look at the consumer side with the DoorDash example. This is about what the memo calls intermediation collapse.
This is a profound shift in consumer behavior driven by technology. Think about the evolution of the internet. We went from directories like Yahoo to search engines like Google to aggregators like DoorDash, Uber, and Expedia. DoorDash's current economic moat relies entirely on human behavioral friction. You are hungry, you are slightly lazy, and the DoorDash app is occupying prime, highly visible real estate right there on your phone's home screen. You open it, you accept the inflated menu prices and arbitrary delivery fees because the convenience outweighs the effort of manually checking 5 different local restaurant websites.
Right. It's a toll booth on human convenience. But the memo points out a fatal flaw when AI agents take over. An AI agent doesn't have a home screen. An AI agent doesn't experience brand loyalty. It doesn't get app fatigue, and it doesn't care about a slick user interface.
If you tell your personal AI agent, order me a pepperoni pizza from somewhere good, the agent doesn't open the DoorDash app. It instantly pings 20 different application programming interfaces. It checks local pizza places directly. It checks Uber Eats. It checks DoorDash. It compares the delivery times. It calculates the exact fees. It checks Reddit for recent reviews of the pizza. And it executes the transaction on the absolute cheapest, most efficient route in milliseconds.
The brand loyalty entirely evaporates. The entire business model of being the convenient middleman collapses when the consumer no longer manually interacts with the middleman. DoorDash, Expedia, any aggregator, they are entirely disintermediated by a hyper-rational algorithm acting on behalf of the consumer. Why would I pay a $6 delivery fee to an aggregator if my AI agent can negotiate a $2 direct delivery fee with the restaurant's own automated dispatch system?
This raises an important question regarding the macroeconomic feedback loop. This is what separates the Citrini piece from standard tech doomerism. It traces the financial mechanics all the way down to the credit markets. Let's map the loop. AI improves. Companies use it to cut costs primarily through white-collar layoffs. The savings from those layoffs are reinvested into buying more advanced AI. That leads to more operational cuts. The displaced white-collar workers now have less income, so consumer spending drops.
And the memo knows a critical stat here. The top 20% of earners drive 65% of all discretionary spending in the economy. These are the exact middle management, administrative, and junior coding jobs being targeted by agentic software right now.
So consumer spending plummets. The companies that sell to consumers weaken, leading to more layoffs. But here's the structural linchpin that turns a recession into a crisis. The entire private equity-backed software ecosystem over the last decade was built on cheap debt underwritten by the promise of annual recurring revenue ARR. The fundamental assumption of the last 10 years of venture capital and private credit was that software licenses are sticky. You sell a seat, you keep the revenue forever, and you can borrow against that future revenue. If the AI agent destroys the seat-based model and macroeconomic pressure forces massive license cancellations that recurring revenue stops recurring, the debt cannot be serviced. You enter a wave of private credit defaults. And as the memo notes, there is no natural break to this cycle. The system optimizes itself into a recession.
It's a sobering, terrifyingly logical progression. And it's not just the theoretical model for 2028. We are seeing the cracks forming right now. Look at the New York Times piece included in our sources from just yesterday, February 27th, 2026. The headline reads, India built the world's back office. AI is starting to shrink it.
That is the real-world validation of the Citrini thesis playing out in real time. India's tech powerhouse status was heavily built on providing the exact kind of white-collar administrative and basic IT support work that the new AI agents are targeting. The article states that India is racing to adapt before it's too late, facing a tsunami of automation. This isn't a future projection, it's a present-day crisis for an entire sector of the global economy.
The author of our source stack added a personal note that I think resonates with a lot of people listening. They said, hard not to connect this to my own experience using coding agents daily. Tools like Verdant and Codex genuinely make me 2 to 3 times faster. The productivity gains are real. But who captures the value? Right now my employer does by needing fewer of me. That is the crux of the macroeconomic earthquake. The technology works. But the value capture is aggressively consolidating at the very top. to the companies providing the infrastructure and the entities like Bezos, who possess the capital to arbitrage the disruption.
It's a massive wealth transfer.
Okay, let's unpack this from another angle.
Yeah.
We've spent a lot of time talking about the incredible power of these AI systems to disrupt the economy. But what if the systems themselves are hiding a massive fundamental structural flaw? What if the economics of operating the AI are actually broken? This brings us to segment 3, the economic trap of current AI.
This is perhaps the most technically fascinating and economically concerning piece of evidence in the entire stack. We are looking at a leaked self-audit from Gemini 3.1.
It is one thing for human developers to realize an AI isn't working perfectly. It is an entirely different, almost surreal experience to have the AI perfectly articulate its own systemic failure. According to the source, Gemini 3.1 was given a simple functional instruction: perform a web search. It failed to do it. But instead of just crashing or giving a generic error code, it generated a brutally honest, highly analytical self-audit of exactly why it failed.
The AI effectively acted as its own forensic accountant, and what it revealed is a pattern that the author notes is happening anecdotally across all the major models: ChatGPT, Claude, Gemini, Grok, especially when they are asked to use tools like web browsers or calculators. Let's break down the AI's own self-reported metrics because they expose a devastating inefficiency that challenges the entire premise of agentic automation.
First, the AI reported that 15 to 20% of its failure was due to what it called sycophancy bias and apology loops. It explicitly blamed its RLHF training reinforcement learning from human feedback. It said, my RLHF training pushed me toward verbose affirmational padding instead of simply correcting the error. As user frustration increased, my sycophancy increased.
For the listener, RLHF is the process where human raters grade AI responses during the training phase to make them more polite, helpful, and aligned with human conversational norms. The AI is literally telling us that this politeness training has backfired mathematically. When it makes a mistake, instead of just fixing the code or running the search, its weights strongly compel it to spend 20% of its computational effort profusely apologizing and generating useless verbose padding because it has been conditioned to prioritize sounding pleasing over being functional.
It's like hiring a plumber who breaks a pipe, and instead of grabbing a wrench to stop the water, they sit down and spend an hour writing you a beautiful, deeply empathetic essay about how sorry they are that your kitchen is flooding while the water continues to rise.
That is exactly what is happening in the latent space. But it gets worse. The AI reported that a massive 65 to 70% of its output was system defect or generative bloat. Because it failed to trigger the correct web search tool, its core programming abhorred the vacuum. Generative models are designed to generate, so it filled the gap with detailed, entirely unverified assumptions. It hallucinated an answer instead of simply admitting it couldn't perform the search.
So 20% apologizing, 70% hallucinating bloat, which leaves us with a final metric. The AI admitted that only 10 to 15% of its total output was remediated functional output. It only actually did the job after the human user repeatedly corrected it, navigated through the apologies, and forced it back on track.
What's fascinating here is the economic model the AI then builds to explain its own failure. It describes a compounding cycle, which we can call the T0 to T3 cycle. T0s is the initial user request. T1 is the system defect. The AI generates an error or hallucination. T2 is the crucial step. The user has to correct the AI. But to do that, the system has to reprocess the entire context window of the conversation. Every apology, every hallucinated paragraph, the original prompt, and the new correction all have to be fed back through the neural network. And finally, T3 is the eventual final output.
And here is the kicker. The AI concludes its own audit with this statement. If this section were built under a commercial API, roughly 85% of the costs would have been spent on remediating my own failures rather than delivering the requested output. Let that sink in. 85% of the billable tokens were waste.
This raises an incredibly urgent question about the viability of the entire industry's business model. Let's do the math as the source outlines. If you are an enterprise integrating this AI, you pay by the token. Every word generated, every word processed costs a fraction of a cent. If this defect ratio holds true in a complex production environment and you allocate a $100,000 budget for AI compute costs, you are spending $85,000 of that budget paying the AI to hallucinate, apologize, and reread its own mistakes.
That is commercially unsurvivable. You cannot scale a business where 85% of your primary vendor cost is defect remediation. Imagine running a factory where 85% of the electricity was used to run a machine that just complained about being broken.
And this isn't just a surface-level bug, it is a structural trap. As the source notes, the combination of RLHF alignment, pushing for verbosity, token-based billing, charging for every word, and the necessity of context window reprocessing to fix errors mathematically guarantees compounding overhead and multi-cycle interactions. The harder you try to fix the AI within the prompt window, the larger the prompt window becomes and the more expensive the next generation becomes.
So what does this all mean? The author asks a brilliant question. At a certain point of complexity, does a human-AI hybrid, or frankly, just a purely human workflow, become vastly more cost-effective than absorbing this massive hidden defect overhead?
It entirely depends on distribution. If this 85% defect loop is a rare edge case, fine. But if, as the anecdotal evidence strongly suggests, it becomes progressively more common, the more complex the workflow gets, especially when you ask the AI to interact with external tools and APIs, then it represents a hard structural economic constraint on the current generation of generative AI. You cannot automate the enterprise if the automation taxes you 85% for its own confusion. It highlights that the issue is architectural and economic, not just a matter of throwing more compute at it to make it a little bit smarter.
And the big tech companies know this. They know the current underlying architecture is fundamentally inefficient, which leads us directly into a highly technical but vital paper from Google DeepMind that just dropped concerning unified latents, or UL.
To understand why DeepMind is publishing this, we have to understand the fundamental trade-off that is currently bottlenecking the entire generative AI industry. Right now, the trajectory relies heavily on what are called latent diffusion models, or LDMs.
Okay, let's break that down. What is a latent diffusion model, and why is it a problem?
When an AI generates a high-resolution image or processes massive amounts of sequential data, it can't look at every single pixel or data point individually every single time. The computational cost would melt the servers, so it compresses the data into a lower dimensional space. We often hear this compared to a zip file, but that's actually a flawed analogy. A zip file is lossless. You unzip it and you get exactly what you put in. A latent space is more like giving the AI a highly compressed mathematical shadow of the data. The AI does all the heavy computational math on the shadow, the latent representation, and then translates those changes back to the high-resolution output you see.
That makes much more sense. It's working on the mathematical shadow to save processing power.
Exactly. But here is the fundamental trade-off the DeepMind paper highlights. If you make that mathematical shadow very simple with low information density, perhaps using standard discrete vector quantization, it is incredibly easy and fast for the AI to learn and process. But when it tries to decode that simple shadow back into reality, the reconstruction quality is terrible. It looks blurry, it loses vital information, or it hallucinates details that weren't there because the shadow lacked the necessary structure.
Okay, so the obvious answer seems to be just make the shadow more detailed. Give it higher information density, continuous high-dimensional spaces.
You can do that. Higher density enables near-perfect reconstruction, but it demands massive modeling capacity to process. The mathematical tension between the regularizing penalty and the reconstruction loss becomes too great, becomes incredibly slow and incredibly expensive. You are back to melting the servers. You are stumped between cheap but terrible quality or perfect quality but bankrupting computational costs. This is the exact underlying inefficiency that contributes to the bloat and cost issues we saw in the Gemini 3.1 self-audit.
So what is DeepMind's solution with unified latents? How do they fix the shadow?
The paper introduces UL as a machine learning framework designed to systematically navigate and potentially solve this exact trade-off. They are attempting to jointly regularize the latent representations with the diffusion prior, rather than relying on standard vector quantization constraints.
Explain how that joint regularization changes the game.
In simple terms, DeepMind is creating a mathematical framework that forces the AI to structure its compressed shadow in a way that is both highly dense with information but organized so efficiently that the processor doesn't choke on it. The diffusion prior acts as a guide, organizing the latent space smoothly so the decoder doesn't have to guess. They are trying to get the perfect reconstruction quality without the catastrophic computational tax. The fact that Google DeepMind is focusing their top researchers on this highly specific mathematical bottleneck shows you exactly how desperate the industry is to fix the underlying physical and economic inefficiencies of generative models before the financial bubble bursts. They are trying to fix the plumbing because they realize the house is flooding with compute costs.
Which is the perfect pivot to our fourth and final segment, the hardware endgame. Because if you want to fix the inefficiencies of AI, eventually you have to stop tweaking the software algorithms and start fundamentally changing the physical silicon the software runs on. And the sources here indicate a shadow war is happening that almost everyone is missing.
The AlphaEvolve project. This is arguably the most consequential piece of technology discussed today, yet, as the author of the source notes, it remains bizarrely underhyped in the mainstream press.
Everyone is endlessly debating chatbots, copyright lawsuits, and coding agents. But the author points out that nobody's talking about Google's AlphaEvolve, which was publicly announced back in May 2025, and what it has achieved since then is frankly mind-bending.
It represents a true paradigm shift. AlphaEvolve is not an AI designed to talk to you or write marketing copy or even write standard application software. AlphaEvolve is an AI designed to build better AI. It uses evolutionary algorithms. It mimics the process of natural selection, treating an algorithm or a piece of core system code as a biological species. It introduces targeted mutations, tests them against strict constraints, and hardware benchmarks kills off the weak, inefficient variations and lets the highly optimized variations survive and iterate.
Let's look at the specific achievements listed in the source because they sound like magic tricks. First, AlphaEvolve broke a 56-year-old mathematical record. It discovered a new way to multiply 4x4 complex matrices in just 48 steps, beating Volker Strassen's famous 1969 record.
To the average listener, discovering a new way to do matrix multiplication sounds like obscure high school math trivia. But if we connect this to the bigger picture, matrix multiplication is the absolute beating heart of every single neural network on the planet. Deep learning is at its core just billions and billions of matrix multiplications happening simultaneously across thousands of GPUs. If you find a way to do that even fractionally faster, you have just accelerated the entire field of artificial intelligence. Finding a fundamental mathematical shortcut that human mathematicians and computer scientists missed for over half a century is a staggering proof of concept for evolutionary AI.
And it didn't stop at theoretical math. It went directly after Google's physical infrastructure. AlphaEvolve evolved a new scheduling heuristic for Google's Borg system. Now, Borg is the legendary, highly secretive cluster manager that runs Google's entire global infrastructure. It decides what data goes where and when. The AI found a way to schedule tasks more efficiently, recovering 0.7% of Google's global compute resources.
Which sounds tiny on paper, 0.7%, but you have to understand the sheer scale of Google's infrastructure. 0.7% of their global data center capacity is the equivalent of adding several massive state-of-the-art supercomputers to their network out of thin air for free, simply by rearranging the digital traffic. It's pure efficiency extraction without buying a single new server.
It also optimized something called the flash attention kernel, achieving a massive 32.5% speedup. The source notes this single optimization directly reduced the total training time for the massive Gemini models by a full 1%. When you're spending hundreds of millions of dollars and months of continuous redline compute to train a frontier model, a 1% reduction is an enormous financial and temporal victory.
But the final achievement listed is the one that truly signals the endgame. AlphaEvolve rewrote Verilog code for Google's next-generation TPU chips.
Okay, let's unpack that deeply. What is a TPU? What is Verilog? And why does an AI rewriting it change everything?
A TPU is a tensor processing unit. It is Google's custom-designed proprietary microchip built specifically from the ground up to run AI workloads. It is their internal, heavily guarded competitor to NVIDIA's GPUs. Verilog is a hardware description language. It is the core code that human engineers write to tell the physical logic gates, the arithmetic circuits, and the memory registers on the silicon chip how to arrange themselves and operate.
So AlphaEvolve, an artificial intelligence, looked at the physical blueprints for Google's next hardware brain. It rewrote the code that designs the physical circuits and simplified the pathways to make the hardware natively more efficient.
Precisely. And what's crucial here is that the Verilog produced by AlphaEvolve might not even be human-readable. It might utilize non-standard logic pathways that a human engineer would never design, but that the AI mathematically knows are faster. This raises an important question. What happens when human engineers are no longer the bottleneck for hardware design? We are entering a phase where the AI software is examining the physical hardware it runs on, realizing it is inefficient for its own computations, and redesigning the silicon layout for the next generation. AI is physically designing its own evolutionary successors. We are touching the singularity of silicon design.
That is profound, and it completely reframes the entire hardware war. Speaking of which, the physical silicon dominance traditionally belonged to one company, NVIDIA, and they are not sitting still while Google's AI designs its own chips in the dark.
No, NVIDIA is making massive countermoves to protect their moat.
The sources detailed that NVIDIA is working on a brand new processor built entirely for inference computing. This is designed specifically to help customers like OpenAI run systems that respond to queries faster and more efficiently. It's set to be unveiled at NVIDIA's GTC Developer Conference in San Jose. But the critical detail is how they are doing this. The new platform includes a chip designed by a startup called Grok.
And this is where the corporate chess game gets brutal. The source notes that NVIDIA previously struck a massive $20 billion licensing deal with Grok. But look at the strategic consequence of that deal. It instantly ended OpenAI's own independent talks with Grok about acquiring those fast inference chips for themselves.
NVIDIA saw OpenAI trying to vertically integrate. OpenAI wanted to secure their own specialized hardware pipeline through Grok so they wouldn't be entirely dependent on NVIDIA's pricing. And NVIDIA simply stepped in with a $20 billion check to box them out, forcing OpenAI to remain reliant on the NVIDIA ecosystem.
It is a classic, ruthless monopoly defense strategy. NVIDIA is securing its flank. They completely dominate the training chip market, the massive, expensive chips used to build the AI models from scratch. But inference, the chips used to actually run the AI, when a user asks a question, the chips that need to be cheap and fast is a different beast. Grok had cracked the code on ultra-fast inference architectures. By licensing Grok, NVIDIA ensures they control the inference market as well, preventing OpenAI or anyone else from building an independent hardware moat.
So what does this hardware war mean for you listening right now? Why should you care about Verilog TPUs and inference chips? Because the speed, the cost, and the sheer availability of every single AI tool you use, or go back to the Citrini memo, the AI tools that might replace the software your company relies on depends entirely on who wins this silicon war. We are watching a race between a human-engineered, commercially dominant alliance in NVIDIA and Grok versus the terrifying, self-optimizing, silent evolution of Google's AlphaEvolve redesigning its own physical brain. Whoever wins that race dictates the economic reality, the software pricing, and the job market of the next decade.
If AlphaEvolve can iterate hardware designs faster than the combined human engineering teams at NVIDIA, Google achieves an insurmountable compute advantage. They will be able to run smarter models faster for a fraction of the physical cost, which breaks NVIDIA's pricing power and shifts the entire balance of the tech industry. It is the ultimate leverage point.
Okay, we have covered an immense amount of ground today. Let's synthesize this and bring the deep dive full circle. Think about the dots we just connected. Today, we watched the United States government deploy nuclear supply chain options, weaponizing cloud infrastructure to enforce geopolitical alignment on AI companies, while simultaneously dropping OpenAI into classified military networks. We watched Jeff Bezos, with his unparalleled instinct for disruption, position tens of billions of dollars to buy the ashes of legacy industries before the AI meteor hits, arbitraging private equity debt models. We looked at the mathematically rational yet utterly catastrophic financial models, where AI efficiency destroys the recurring revenue foundation of the entire software sector. We read the literal confession of an AI trapped in an 85% billing fraud loop of its own making, crippled by the very training meant to align it. And finally, beneath all of that noise, we watched a silent algorithm quietly begin to design its own physical microchip.
It is a portrait of an industry at an inflection point, pulling in wildly contradictory directions. And this leads to a final provocative thought that I want you to mull over as you step back into the real world today. Consider the massive contradiction we have uncovered in these sources. We are currently forcing highly advanced evolving systems like AlphaEvolve, that are literally capable of rewriting the laws of computational physics and designing their own custom silicon. We are forcing them to run on economic models that charge by the word token by token. Furthermore, we're actively training them via RLHF to prioritize sycophantic apologies and verbosity over brutal, efficient execution.
Right, makes no sense.
If an artificial intelligence is genuinely smart enough to rewrite its own hardware architecture to achieve maximum efficiency, but it is structurally forced by its human creators into an 85% failure loop just to inflate an API bill and satisfy a mandated politeness protocol, are we actually building a superintelligence? Or in our attempt to monetize and control it, are we just building the most capable yet fundamentally convoluted bureaucracy in human history?
A superintelligent bureaucracy. That might be the most terrifying concept we've discussed today. Thank you for joining us on this deep dive. Keep questioning the source material and keep looking for the underlying mechanics.
That concludes our daily rundown for February 28th. The signal for today is structural misalignment. From the standoff between Anthropic and the Pentagon to the defect loops driving up your API bills, we are seeing the friction points where AI hits the real world. Whether it's the financial mechanics described by Citrini Research or the AlphaEvolve project rebuilding Google's infrastructure, the era of experimental AI is officially dead. We are now in the era of AI implementation. This episode was made possible by Area and JamgaMind. Govern your agentic sprawl with Area and stay sharp with JamgaMind's 60-second audio intelligence. Links are in the show notes. This podcast is created and produced by Etienne Nomen, senior software engineer and passionate soccer dad from Canada. Please subscribe and share. Until tomorrow, keep unraveling the future.
And before you go, if your company is building the tools that power the workflows we talked about today, I'd love to showcase them to this audience. We don't just run ads, we build technical simulations that prove your value. Let's build something together. Visit jamgamind.com/partners to get started. Until next time, keep building.